Welcome to the fourth lecture of the course Linguistics 2, English 504. Now, let's look at what we talked about in the last lecture. We talked about the scope of linguistics, then we talked about what are descriptive linguistics, the comparative linguistics, and the historical linguistics. In that, we said that the descriptive linguistics is basically the fundamental aspect of study of language, and we describe language in its own identity. Then we talked about the historical linguistics, where we talked about the development of language over the passage of time. After that, we talked about the comparison of two kinds of the comparison of the histories of two languages. We also talked about the reformation of the proto-language or the parent language, and forming of cognates or the set of sounds, and finding the similarities and dissimilarities between the sounds of two different languages. And finally, we concluded by saying that in fact historical linguistics and comparative linguistics, they cannot keep the descriptive linguistics out, and they go side by side, because when we are comparing the histories of two languages, we need to describe each individual language. Now, what we are going to talk about today, in today's lecture, is the levels of linguistic analysis. Now, language has moved over the passage of time, has developed levels, and in the process of learning language, a person attains the higher levels, and he moves on to higher levels when he is in the process of learning language. Now, for language studies, there were areas marked. When the linguists, they study language, they demarcated, they subdivided the different areas in language, and this basically was done in order to study language in analytical and systematic way, because it becomes difficult to study language when or to study any phenomena unless you go to the smallest part and you study each part individually. So likewise, for language study, the areas were marked, the different levels were marked. So the areas are marked, and this really helped the linguists to study each part individually with separate sets of rules for each level, and finally they came up with one whole. So language has hierarchical. This means that when we say that it has levels, different levels, so we can also say that it has hierarchical structure. There are lower levels, which are the basic stages of learning language. A man starts, or a child starts learning language from the very smallest part, which is like the uttering of sounds, and then maybe the child would go to uttering the words, and then forming the understanding this uttering sounds, and then maybe speaking some words. And from words, the child would move to the sentences, short phrases, and sentences, and so on. So this means that the hierarchical structure moves upwards, and there is a development in the learning of language. From the lower level, a person moves to the higher levels. Now, language is made of smaller units. The smallest unit, which is a phoneme, or the basic indivisible part, I would say, is phoneme, and the phonemes are further join to make the morphemes. But if we speak from the top-down order, in the top-down order, we may say that smaller units are made of smaller units which have still smaller units, and finally the smallest indivisible unit. So this is basically the single indistinguishable sound called phoneme. So phoneme is the smallest bit, or the smallest component of language, which of course has which means the basic sound, and basic sound which is uttered right when the child starts learning a language, or starts comprehending the sounds and uttering sounds. We can also say that we can also speak it other way around, that phonemes, they combine together to make morphemes, which combine to make up words, and the words go on to make up the phrases and sentences. And finally, we have the largest bit, which is called a text or a discourse, which is of course more than one sentence. Now, phonemes, when they are now, there is of course a set of rules for each stage. The phonemes, they combine to make morphemes or the words in certain orders. There is a proper sequence in which the sounds are combined, the letters are combined, and they make the syllables, and the syllables go on to make the words, and then of course the words, they make the morphemes, and the morphemes go on to make the words, and of course again then the words, when they are linked in a certain order, they may they give us a meaningful sentences. Now again, the sentences, when they are linked together, they are made, the simple sentences, they are linked to make compound sentences, and the compound sentences further, they are linked with the help of connectives like and, but, for, and we get a paragraph or maybe a text which we call discourse. So basically it is a hierarchical structure. It starts from the smallest unit and goes on to make larger bits. Now at each stage or level, there are certain rules which operate, certain rules operating which permit occurrence in combination of smaller. So as we said earlier, that each stage there are certain rules operating. It is not a random combination, it is not a random order in which you make combine the phonemes to make the morphemes or the morphemes to make the words. At each stage there are certain rules, there are combinations. These combinations have certain rules which and using those rules you combine, they combine, and they create meaningful discourses or the meaningful sentences and the meaningful words. Now, rules of phonology, we may say that rules of phonology determine occurrence in combination of particular phonemes. If we go on to, if we explain this phenomena of combination, we may say that there are rules. Let's say if we say that the rules of phonology, now these rules, they determine the occurrence and combination of particular phonemes. How some sounds are produced, how some sounds are uttered, how some sounds are understood, how some sounds they are combined. And then rules for word formation. After that, when the phonemes they combine to make morphemes, there are rules for word formation. How the words behave, how the morphemes behave, or how the phonemes behave in certain words, and how they are linked in different ways to make words. Then when these words are combined, again the new set of rule operates, that is the sentence formation rule. And these rules, they determine how the words are linked, how they are combined, why they are combined in certain order, what is the positioning of words in a sentence. Like for example, if you change the positioning of the words, you get a different meaning, and sometimes a meaningless utterance, we get a meaningless sentence which doesn't have any comprehensible meaning. But again, when we look at the combination, sometimes when the words are combined in different orders, we get the meaning of the sentence changes. It depends on where certain word is put and how that word modifies another word. What is basically the result of putting a word in a sentence in a certain position? What is the impact of that word on the adjoining words or the words which are before that or after that? Now, so each level is basically a system in itself. Again, when the sentences they are combined in a discourse to create a discourse or to create a paragraph or any text, which is of course more than one sentence, again there are rules operating. Now these rules again determine how the sentences should be placed in a paragraph and how they should be linked. Again, when we see that when they are linked, they might have an impact on the other sentences, and when we read them, when we read the text, we see that they have they give us a certain meaning of that paragraph or a certain meaning of that discourse, and if we change the order of sentences, the meanings might change. So if we combine the meaning of if we combine the individual meanings of these sentences, they would not make that impact, whereas if we look at that discourse as a unified whole, we see that that might give us that might give us a different meaning. So because there is a certain set of rules again at discourse level which is operating and which is helping us to combine those sentences in certain order. Now each level, so here we can say that each level is a complete system in itself, and that system can of course again be studied independently of the other system, and at each level, when you move at the upper level or the lower level, you have a different set of rules that is operating in order to give us meaningful text or meaningful discourses or meaningful sentences or meaningful words. Now because of these rules at each level, these are in fact very helping to us. Because of these rules at each level, we can analyze each level independently of the other. If there were just rules, if there were no independent rules, it would have become difficult to study each individual stage. So at every stage you have different rules, and these rules are independent of the rules of the next level, and they are helping us to study, to analyze the components of language at each level. The rules of phonemes, they help us to study the phonemes, how the phonemes are uttered or how the sounds are uttered. The rules of morphemes, they are helping us in the study of the words, how certain words are made, and the rules of morphemes, they are helping us to find this, to analyze the words or the syllables, how certain syllables or the sounds they are combined to make words. Again, the rules of sentence, they are helping us they are helping us in determining how some sentences are made by combination of different words. Again, when you look at the sentences, they are linked to make discourses. So the rules of discourse, again, they help us to determine how certain sentences are combined to form larger texts or discourses. So although each level is linked to the other in hierarchy, still it is independent because of the distinct rules that can be described, analyzed, and understood. We see that each level has some link. They are linked in hierarchy. The rules of morphemes are related to the phonemes and to the rules of phonemes in some way, and the rules of morphemes again are related with the rules of the sentences or syntax. But they also enjoy their independent entity, and they can be studied in themselves, that how certain sounds are produced or how certain words are made, and what is the formula or what is the rule for making certain words or certain sounds or certain sentences. But again, they have a link to the next level, which helps us in, of course, studying the development of language or studying the link of words, and that is how the language is developed. In fact, that when you combine the smaller bits, you form the larger sound, the larger bits, and again we get a larger chunk of language in the form of discourse or larger text. So they are linked and they are separate. They can be studied independently of others, and they can also be linked. So each level of analysis corresponds to each level of the structure of language. It has a certain correspondence. It has a certain link. Each level has certain link with the other level. So here, let's look at this table, and we can see the levels of analysis on the left side and the levels of structure. That what is the analysis when we analyze a language? When we analyze language, we study each individual level and what is happening in fact in that level. What is a part of the language, or what is the shape of the language in that particular level. Now, first of all, we see that we have phonetics and phonology, in which we study the sounds, and we restrict ourselves to the level of sounds. We move on. Next, we see morphology, which is, of course, the rule restricts itself to the study of word formation, how the words are made. Then we move on to syntax. Syntax restricts itself, and we study in syntax. We study the sentence formation, how the sentences are made by the combination of words. Then we have semantics, how we give meanings to those sentences. Semantics also means the study of the choice of words, how the words are chosen, how the words are selected to give a meaningful sentence. Because if you have synonyms, you have antonyms of words, and one word, if replaced by a different word, may give us a different impressions. It's basically the perceived meaning or the impression of the word. And again, if you put another a synonym, it may not mean the same, it may not give the same impact that a different word might give if used. So semantics, we talk about the meanings of the sentences, the meanings of the words, in certain situations, how these words are used, and sometimes when the situation changes, how the words are replaced. So it's basically talks about the meanings of the words, the meanings of the sentences. Moving on to discourse, when we start giving meanings to the sentences, again we link them, we join the sentences, we make compound sentences from the simple sentences. We use connectives, we use connecting words like and, but, so, therefore, although, however, to join these simple sentences and create an impact of and make a larger chunk of language, like a discourse, like a paragraph or an essay, or we may call it, in general words, we may call it a text or a discourse. So there again, these connected sentences, they have an impact on each other, and if they are used in different positions, that might carry, the text might carry a different meaning. So in discourse or discourse analysis, when we analyze discourse, we see the impact of sentences if they are used in different places, and there again we study at all levels, with all the levels. Again, we can analyze the discourse by studying sounds. Again, we look at the sounds, the rhyming scheme, the role of the different words at different levels, the repetition, the word form, how the words are used, and what meaning they carry, and what impact they have on the adjoining words. So we study each individual component to arrive at a concluding analysis, arrive at a concluding the final analysis of a discourse. So this means that all the levels, basically, they enjoy their individual entity, but they also have their an impact on the other levels when they are put together. Like a discourse embodies all the levels, and we go on to study each sound. We go on to study the sound system and the word system. Again, the syntax, how the sentences are linked, and what meanings they carry. So discourse embodies all the other levels as well. Now, as we've just talked, that levels of language, they are not completely separate. They are important, and vital linkages are present. Now, we cannot ignore these linkages. We cannot separate a sound or a phoneme from the other phonemes being used in the same discourse. We cannot separate the impact of the words that are used in impact of the words on the other words, or the effects of those words on the other words in a discourse. There is an important link, there is a vital linkage present, and it's basically the meaning comes out after the words are combined or after the sentences are combined. Then of course we can analyze it properly, and we can arrive at the final analysis of any language chunk. Now, what was earlier thought was that phonology had no link with semantics. Now this is in contrast to the thought earlier, where people thought that phonology is an independent, is the sounds, they have no links with the words, and the words, they don't have a link with the sentences. And that is basically the earlier part, the very earlier part of the development of language. The language had not developed that much. So in the start, there was no concept of the linkages of these, the concept of the linkages of these components or these levels. But gradually, now we know that link is much more complex than thought earlier. This link is there, and the overall impact of a language chunk or the overall impact of a text, it comes out of studying the linkages between different levels. It's only that when the sounds are combined to make morphemes, and the words are combined to make sentences, and the sentences are combined to make a discourse or make a text, it's only after that that we can study language, we can study we can analyze a piece of language, and we can give the statements after after studying it. So for the study, or for giving a satisfactory answer, or for giving a comprehensive analysis of any language chunk, we need to go to the smallest unit, and we have to study the smallest units of language, and we have to see their combinations and the different orders of combinations and the different meanings they carry and their impact on the adjoining words or the adjoining sentences, and only then we can arrive at the final analysis. Now, discourse made, for example, if we say the discourse, we've already said, as we talked about it earlier, that discourse made up of all levels working together. Semantics says analysis both at words and sentence meanings. So this means that each upper level embodies the lower level rules. Like semantics it analyzes both at words and sentence meanings. It analyzes the words, how the words are made by joining the sounds, and it also analyzes the sentence in their meaning, the meanings of the sentence. Now let's look at phonetics. Phonetics explores how the linguistically relevant sounds in languages of the world are produced, and how these sounds are perceived using experimental and computational words. Now phonetics, looking at the levels of these language, let's talk about briefly, give a brief description of the levels of language, and in that let's look at the first level, that is a phonetics. What is phonetics basically? Phonetics explores how the linguistically relevant sounds in the languages of the world are produced, and how these sounds are perceived using experimental and computational tools. Now there are different new techniques now to study the language. So using the experimental, using computational tools, we study the sounds, how the relevant sounds in the languages of the world are produced. Like we discussed, we had it in the last lecture, that what the linguists do, they try to find the similarities and dissimilarities between the sounds of language, and they make the pairs, cognates, and then they trace their origin, and they find out a word. They find out that these the sister words, they are made from the sister languages, they are made from a proto language. So in that, what they do, again in phonetics, we can link it with phonetics, that how these sounds are perceived, how these sounds are understood, they are uttered, they are understood, and how and what are the relevant sounds for each you can say object, for each object or for each word you have some sounds behind, and when these sounds are combined you utter a word. So what are the relevant sounds, what are the similar sounds, what are the different sounds, and how these sounds are linked together to give a meaningful utterance, to come up with a meaningful word for any object. And it's again it's a concept in the mind. It's not necessary that the one word which means an object in one language may mean the same thing in the other language. We might have a word tree for one thing in English. We might have a word tree which may not mean the same in another language. So it's basically the concept which is already there in the mind of a person, and this concept is of course conventional. Now we've started calling, we have that words, and once the conventions are established, they are difficult to change. So when the words were being coined, there were concepts present in the mind, and which helped to form up some words and decide that, well, these words mean these objects. So it was because what in phonetics people, the linguists did was that they found out the similarities of sounds in different languages, and similarities of sounds between the words used in different languages, and then they found the pairs. They paired them, forming cognates, as we saw in the last lecture, that they found words and they linked them, and then they found the parent word. So this is what was done in phonetics, and we can say, moving on, we see that it studies phonetics. What does phonetics do? It studies language at the level of sounds, articulated by the human speech mechanism and received by auditory mechanism. Now, here we see that they are studying the uttering of language, uttering of speech, and also the receiving. So they are studying at both the ends. How the sounds are uttered, under what influence are the speakers when they utter a certain sound, what does a child see, or what concept might be present in the child's mind when the child starts uttering some sounds. They might establish some kind of link, some kind of similarity in the sound that they start uttering those sounds. And then how we receive them, how the adults receive them, under what, how they link those words with certain things. Now, like a mother, it's usually we see that a mother is the best judge of a child's language. The mother is the best person who can really understand the child's very basic language. The mother understands the sounds, the mother understands the words. It's because the child, of course, there's maximum interaction. There's a lot of interaction between mother and child. So how, under what influence is mother, or what does mother observe when the child utters certain sound, and what the child means by that word? It's a mother who is receiving those words, or who's receiving those sounds. So phonetics, in phonetics, they look at how the sounds are uttered, how they are received, and what is the response to those words, and how they are, these sounds. It also studies these sounds, how the sounds can be distinguished and characterized by the manner in which they are produced. Now then there is a distinction. There are different sounds, and how they can be distinguished from the other sounds. What is, as I said earlier, that when you join the words, or when you join the sounds, or you have different sound. A child has different sounds for different objects or for different actions. So how they are distinguished, how this distinction is made, and how one thing is separated from the other, or one sound is separated from the other, and the mother understands what my child means by uttering this sound, and what my child means by uttering some other sound. So phonetics studies basically how the sounds can be distinguished from the other sounds, and it also studies how they are characterized. There is a certain character, a certain action, or a certain response given to each sound. When a child utters those sounds, the mother associates those sounds to certain actions. It also talks about different symbols, phonetic symbols used for different sounds and alphabets. Now again, the linguists have linked certain alphabets, and they have formed a whole system of phonetics. And there is a symbol given to each sound. Now A linked with E, sometimes A linked with E, A has so many different sounds, like A, E. Again, you have vowels, you have short vowels and the long vowels. This whole system is basically devised in order to distinguish the sounds, because sounds in different words, different letters have different sounds sometimes. One letter in one word may not have the same sound when it is used in some other combination or in some other word. So in order to distinguish the difference, in order to separate the sounds, in order to study them to the smallest level, we need to devise symbols. They are called the phonetic symbols. When letters, they are combined, they have different sounds, then there are, of course, these symbols are joined in different combinations to form different words. So phonetics is all about talking about symbols, the combination of symbols, the linking of those symbols and associating those symbols or associating those sounds to certain actions or certain activities of life. Now in phonology, what is phonology? Phonology examines how sounds pattern in languages, how these sounds are grouped, are linked together to form words, how sounds are combined to make words, how sounds near each other affect each other, and how sounds are affected by where in the word or phrase they occur. So this means that when sounds are linked in different order, they might give a different sound to a word, they might give a different pronunciation of a word, they might give different meaning even when they are linked in a different way. So phonology basically studies how sounds pattern in languages, how sounds are combined to make pattern, means that how they are linked to make words and how they are linked, how the words are linked. What is the pattern? What is the design? What is the order in which the sounds are linked to make words? So there is a certain pattern. There is, for every word, for every sentence, there is a certain pattern in which the sounds are linked, and for every word again there is an order in which the sounds are linked and to give a meaningful word. How some sounds are combined to make words, and how these sounds near each other affect each other. So when you change the order of that sound, when you put that phonetic symbol at some other place, again that might have a different effect on the adjoining alphabet. So when E is used in different places, might have a different effect. When vowels are put at different places, they might give different effect to consonants. Likewise, you have short vowels, long vowels used at different places, or the consonants or the letters, the morphemes, the syllables, they are formed, different syllables are formed, different sounds are formed when they are put in different order. So this means that they have an effect on each other. The sounds, they have effect on each other when they are put in different order. And how the sounds are affected by where in the word and phrase they occur. So see, this means that sounds are changed, they are affected in the sentence, or according to the place in the morpheme. Likewise, when words are used in different places in a sentence, the order is changed, the place is changed, they might have a different stress, they might have a different focus, the focus is changed, they might have a different impact on the adjoining words. Like you have a different stress pattern. When the sounds are put in different order, the stress pattern changes, the pronunciation of that word changes sometimes. So, and sometimes it becomes meaningless. There is no meaning that we can bring out of that word. So phonology also studies the formation of syllables in larger. Now this also, when you combine the sounds, you form the syllables, like consonant, vowel, consonant put together in different orders might have a different sound. And there is a particular formula, there is a particular way in which the consonants are linked to the vowels, and how many consonants can you put with a vowel and how many vowels maximum you can put in a syllable. So syllable is basically the overall sound of that word, which comes out after when you link the different phonemes together. You can when you link the, for example, when you link the vowels and consonant in certain order, you come up with a sound. So when the order changes, of course the sound changes. Now, phonology also studies the combination of sounds into organized units of speech, the formation of syllables in larger units. Of course, from syllables we move on to the words, and from the words we move on to the sentences. So phonology also talks about the impact of sound, the musical effect. Like, for example, when we are studying, when we are analyzing poetic pieces or the poetic lines. No, there we look at the sound pattern, we look at the rhyming scheme, we look at the musical effect of that poetry. Now, how we study the musical effect, or how we study the rhyming scheme, we go on to the smallest units. We study the sounds, we look at the syllables, we also look at the consonant and vowels, in what way they are used and how they are repeated. In poetry, sometimes you see that a line is repeated. Always there is a line repeated after certain lines, so that creates a musical impact. So overall impact of that, when we say the overall impact, that for example, the poem is very musical, it carries musical impact. No, what does it mean? Does it really can you hear the bells ringing in that? No. But when you read that poem in a certain order, you find that some sounds are being repeated, some lines are being repeated. So that is why that is because the sounds are used in certain way, the phonemes are used, the words are used in certain way, in a certain order, that there you feel that you feel that musical effect, or you feel the repetition. That repetition of sounds is creating a musical effect of that poet. Likewise in prose, when we look at prose, the literature in prose form, we see that sometimes you have the use of words, certain words used again and again, or maybe a set of vocabulary that can be associated with a certain author. No, when we study the works of author, when we study the works of prose writers, we see that they have a certain set of vocabulary, or they have a certain kinds of words which they are fond of using, and they use them again and again, and of course they become famous, or they become known for such kind of vocabulary, they become known for such kind of words. So this is because they are using them again and again, and they are also using them in a certain order, which they change, which they usually don't change. So they have a certain set of rules, a certain set of vocabulary which they use, and the poets, and you can associate that set of those sounds, or you can associate those words or vocabulary with those authors or poets or prose writers or the poets. There they become known for that. So this means that this study, the combination, is really very vital, or it's really very important to study the larger works, and of course to study the literary works of the poets and prose writers. So, but basically it starts with the study of the smallest units, and we move to the larger units after that. Now, it describes the sound system of a particular language and the combination and distribution of sounds which occur in that language. Now, again, the same thing, that it describes the sound system of a particular language, how these sounds are combined, how the sounds are distributed in a certain text, how some sounds are repeated again and again, how they are distributed in different lines, and what effect or what impact they have when they are spoken in that order, when they are read in that order. And this gives an overall impression of the whole text. Now let's look at an example, like classification is made on the basis of concept of phoneme. Now this classification of words, classification is made, of course, on the basis of phonemes, like I've given you examples after you have M, G, P. Now these are the basic sounds, phonemes, the basic indivisible parts, the components of language. They may combine in certain orders to create an overall impact, which will help us to classify the words, or to classify the kinds of sounds, or to classify the type of words being used in a text. Now these distinct sounds enter into a combination with others. Rules of combination are different in different languages, of course. you have different rules in Urdu, you have different rules in English, different rules in Hindi or French. Now these rules, they determine how they should be combined to give the words of that language, to give the meaningful words of that language. Morphology examines the structure of words again and the principles that govern the formation of words. Again, when you look at the structure of words, you look at structure of words, you study, that goes into the study of morphology, and it examines how the words are formed and how these words are combined to form sentences, what impact the sounds have on each other for the formation of words. Words are also made up of number of units. The word unhappiness, now here we have an example. Unhappiness involves 3 elements or morphemes like unhappy and ness. Now morphology deals with how languages add morphemes together. Now this is how prefixes and suffixes, they are joined with certain basic phonemes to coin new words, to form new words. The word un and then ness linked with the basic word happy to find a new word, unhappiness. So this is a combination of different sounds to form words. It studies the patterns of formation of words by combination of sounds into minimal distinctive units of meaning called morphemes. Now the patterns of formation of words by combination of sounds, how the sounds combine to form the distinctive units of meanings which are called morphemes. Morphemes cannot be broken. It will no longer make sense. For example, we have the word bat as a single morpheme, bat. Now in bat we have 3 letters, B-A-T, bat. There is a certain combination. A comes after B, T comes after A, and then we get a meaningful one word which means, of course, bat, which means one of the sports equipment. But if you change the word, like you put T before A, may not mean anything. It will be, it can be T-A-B, but then tab again would have a different meaning. If you have A-B-T, again no meaning. So the meanings are basically, they sometimes change by the change in the order, and sometimes you get meaningless utterances, meaningless words. So a single morpheme, bat, we can have a single morpheme, bat, or maybe a combination of 2 morphemes like bats. You have 2 different sounds, bat plus s. So bat, s, 2 words, 2 morphemes combined, and you get a different word which is a plural of bat, and the bats. So sometimes it's a single morpheme, some other times you have combination of different morphemes and you get a different word. We see that the level of morphology is related to the phonology in one hand and the semantics to the other. Now here we see, as I said earlier, here we'll look at how these levels are linked to each other. Now morphology is related on the lower side to phonology, and again it has a link to semantics at the higher side. Now we see an example for this. Let's look at the word take. Now if we change this word to took, there is change in one of the sounds, like A changes to double O, U, took. So this is the link with the phonology in the lower side. But this word take changing to took, there is not only a change in the sound, but there is also a change in the meaning. Like took is the past tense of the past form of the word take. The action taken plus time present, and the action took, the action take plus time past. So this is change in the meaning. Now took is of course used in a different way. We use it for the past activities. Take again we use for the present activities. So this is the meaning, a link with the meaning, or link with semantics on the higher side. So morphology also is related, not only related with the formation of words in themselves, but also with the link at the lower side, and lower side with phonology, and on the higher side with semantics or the meaning. So moving on to syntax. Now how we analyze the sentences. when the words are combined to make sentences. Syntax basically investigates the structure of sentences and the common principles that determine how phrases and sentences are built up from words. Now, how the structure of sentence, how the words have been combined, how the words have been combined to give a meaningful sentence, how if they change, how if the places of change, what impact they will have, what meaning will the sentence have. It also deals with the common principles or the rules which tell us how some phrases and sentences are built up from words. So how the words are combined to make sentences, and what sentences, how the sentences will be changed if the words are changed, if the order of the words are changed, and how the sentences, what impact the words will have on each other. It also explores the way that languages vary in their application of these common principles. It also explores the way that languages vary in their application of these common principles by looking at the variation across languages. So syntax also studies the way in which the languages change in their application to these common principles, how the languages have developed, how the sentences have changed to give development to the languages, how the languages vary, and how these common principles, it also looks at the principles by looking at the variation across languages, how what are the differences in the language, what are the different words being used in different languages for the same word. Syntax also describes the rules of positioning of elements in a sentence, how the words are positioned, how the nouns are linked to the verbs, how the pronouns are used instead of nouns, and how what would be the change if the places of the nouns are changed, how the adverbial phrases are used at certain different places, and what impact they will have if the phrases are used, or if the nouns and verbs and the prepositions and the adjectives and the adverbs, they are changed, and what meanings will the sentences carry, and how these meanings will change if the modifiers are put at different places. Now this all comes in the word syntax. We study the sentence structure in syntax. Syntax also describes the function of elements in a sentence, like the noun boy. Now there's a very easy example. Let's look at a very simple example. Boy has different functions or roles in A and B. I have put two sentences here. The boy likes cricket and the old man loved the boy. In the first sentence, the boy is a noun. The boy is a subject, playing the role of a subject in this sentence. Whereas in B, the same word boy is playing the role of an object. It's been put at the end of the sentence. In A it is in the start of the sentence, in B it's the end of the sentence. And look at the role this word is playing. In A it's playing the role of a subject, the action doer. The boy likes cricket. The action doer is a boy. Whereas in B the action doer is old man, and the focus has been shifted from the focus of boy has been shifted from subject to object, and now the action doer is old man, whereas the boy is the agent on which the action is done. So the change of roles, change of place, sometimes can change the roles and sometimes changes the function. Now, rules of syntax should explain how grammatical and meaningful sentences are formed. Basically, the rules of sentences, they should explain, they should be compact enough, they should be accurate enough to explain how the grammatical and meaningful sentences are formed. Now, these sentences which are formed must be meaningful, must be grammatical. Not only grammatical, but also be meaningful. Now, if we look at this example, colorless green ideas sleep furiously. Now, this is grammatically correct. There is no problem with the grammar. You have a subject, you have a verb, you have adverb, furiously. But the sentence is meaningless. So basically the rules is not only the combination, but the meaning as well. We need to have meaningful sentences for the correct formation of a sentence, for the correct usage of these words at different places. Now, coming on to the area of semantics. when we have made sentences, we've just talked that they should be meaningful. Now, semantics is a study which talks about the meanings of words and the sentences independently of any other context. You look at the words and you study the word and look at the meaning of that word independently of the other words first. How that word is used, and then we look at the impact of that word on the other words. How that word, if changed, can have a different meaning, can give a different meaning to the sentence. Semantics seeks to explain how it is that we come to have such a clear understanding of the language we use. Now, normally we are clear, we are sure about the words we are using, we know the meanings of those words. No, but when we analyze it in relation to analyze those words sometimes in relation to the other words, or in with reference to the other words in the sentence, or looking at the situation in which we have used those words, sometimes those words might mean differently. Sometimes those words might be wrongly used. Now, this I would in fact talk a little about the impression those words have. Sometimes the words might have a negative impression or the negative shade of meaning, like the negative connotations. Connotation is basically the shade of meaning or the perceived or the taken meaning of a word. Now, sometimes you use a word, but in that very particular situation, that word might give a negative impression to the listener. So we need another word there. We need to replace that word. We need to put a different word, a different synonym to give a positive impression on the listener. So we look at the situation. Sometimes the words might mean the same, but they have a different impression. They give a different impression to the listener. So it depends on the meaning of that. Semantics is a very important branch which gives, in fact, talks about the meanings of words, and despite knowing the meanings of words, we sometimes use those words in wrong situations and they might give a wrong impression to the listener. Now, semantics seeks to explain how it is that we have such a clear understanding. We do have a clear understanding of the language, and how we have a clear understanding, this is what semantics talks about. It analyzes the structure of the meaning in language. It analyzes what meaning a particular word might have in language. Now, example, semantics analyzes how words similar and different are related. It attempts to show these interrelationships through forming categories. Now, it makes categories. It attempts to analyze and define abstract words. Example, it's easy to define tree, table, but it's difficult to define the abstract things like love, feel, the abstract nouns like love and feel. So it's it might be easy for you to define some concrete things, but when we analyze, we sometimes have such abstract phenomena which are difficult to explain. So it attempts to analyze those abstract words, the words which are considered abstract, like love and feel. You might give some indications, we might refer to some actions, we might refer to some behavior to explain the word love or the word feel, but we cannot see it, we can't see, like we can see a tree and a table. So semantics describes also talks about the words which are thought to be abstract, and it also defines the simple words, the concrete words. Now, moving on to the highest component of a language, which is discourse, a large chunk of language or text called discourse. It's a unit of text used by linguists for the analysis of linguistic phenomena that range over more than one sentence. It is formal and orderly, and usually extended expression of thought on a subject. Thought is extended, there is more than one sentence, the sentences are linked in a certain order to give the overall impression of a text. It's a connected speech, it can be writing, it can be oral. It's a linguistic unit as a conversation or a story, and of course it's larger than a sentence, and it gives the extended meaning to the thought of the speaker or the thought of the writer. Now, what do we do at discourse level? We basically analyze the intersentential links that form a connected or cohesive text. We look at how the sentences have been combined. what links the sentences together have when we when they are, what links they have, and in what impression they give when they are linked in certain order. Cohesion is basically related. It's a relation formed in a sentence between it. Intersentential that form a connected. Looking at the word cohesive. Cohesion. What is cohesion? Cohesion basically it's a relation formed in a sentence between it and the sentences before it and after it by using connectives. Now, of course, when we link sentences, we use connectives. But, and, although, so, therefore, because. Now, what relationship is developed between the sentences coming after a sentence or maybe before a sentence when we link these sentences together? This is what we study in discourse. By this study, we can know how a piece of connected language can have a greater meaning. Then, that is more than the sum of individual sentences. Now, if we analyze the individual sentences, we have the meanings of each sentence. Now, that impression combined together may not give that impact which we get when we study the whole one connected piece of language. So, sentences combined together will give us more impression, will have a more impact, will clarify the thought of the writer in a different way. But if we study the individual sentences, we have a different impression. Finally, we see that there are some other studies like graphology, lexicology. Graphology is the study of writing system of language and conventions used in representing speech in writing or formation of ladders. It's a study of writing system of language and different conventions we use in representing the speech in writing and forming of letters. Then we have lexicology. What does lexicology do? It studies the manner, the way in which the lexical items are grouped together as in the compilation of dictionaries. Now, when the dictionaries are combined, of course, there's a certain order, there's a certain way how the lexical items are grouped together. Now, finally, we have the two views about scope. The microlinguistic. What microlinguistic means is that the study of linguistics is confined to phonology, morphology, and syntax. They say that it's only the theoretical aspect, and the phonology and morphology and syntax, how they are, only this is included in the scope of linguistics. Whereas the other group, the macrolinguistics, they say that there are other aspects of language and its relationship with many areas of human activity, like we talked about in the last lecture, that linguistics also has links with the social sciences or the humanities. So when we include all those things, that of course extends the scope of linguistics. Now, this was what we talked about. This was what we had in this lecture, that we talked about the different branches, the different levels, that each level enjoys a different separate entity, and you can study each level individually, as well as we can study each level in relation to the other levels. Its language is a hierarchical structure, has a hierarchical structure where you have the lower levels like the phonology, and you have the highest level like syntax. And each level gives meaning to the other level when they are studied together. Now, we'll move on to these branches and look at them in detail in the next lecture. That's all we had for this lecture. Thank you.